What is the scariest thing you have seen ever? Story 1. This happened just this past weekend. I came home to find my brother blacked out, and when he came to, he could barely stand or walk. He was in an altered mental state, talking like he was drunk. He hadn't eaten or drunk anything but water in 3 days and had been sleeping almost nonstop. Turns out he's diabetic now and was experiencing diabetic ketoacidosis. He spent the weekend in the ICU. He blacked out because he was so dehydrated that his heart couldn't properly pump blood, and his blood pressure was bottoming out while his heart rate was skyrocketing. His blood glucose was sky high. He's doing better now, thankfully, but I thought I was watching my big brother, my best friend, die right in front of me at the time. Story 2. It was spring of 1995. I was flying back from San Antonio on maybe my 10th trip there. I suppose by this time I had flown probably 50 or so times, so I thought I was a seasoned traveler. I was flying American Airlines. I flew from San Antonio to Dallas. It's the hub of American Airlines. Before my connecting flight to Des Moines took off, a nasty thunderstorm came in. Even so, we all boarded the plane and sat out on the tarmac, waiting for the tower to let us take off. 3 hours passed. I had a clear view of one of the windsocks, and it was pretty much flailing at 45 degrees most of that time. When the captain announced that we could take off, the windsock was completely, solidly horizontal, and the storm was at its worst. We took off, buffeted by winds all the way down the runway. 15 seconds after takeoff, we dropped for a good 5 seconds. The plane fought like crazy to gain altitude, and then it would drop again. It was intense. I grabbed the bottom of my seat because I thought my seatbelt wouldn't hold. Yeah, it was that bad. I remember looking up the aisle during one of the drops and seeing the front of the plane instantly drop like 45 degrees or so, simply because inertia kept my head stationary. Back then, they had phones in the back of the seats, so after about 5 minutes of this chaos, I figured I'd call my wife to say goodbye. It took a minute or so before I could grab a hold of it. I had to brace one arm with another just to disengage it from the back of the seat in front of me. It took a lot of tries, and after a couple of minutes, I was able to clumsily type in the number, as well as my credit card information. Of course, I got our answering machine. We'd fight for altitude like crazy for about 15 seconds, then fall for 5. Constantly. The captain came on and said this was going to last for 20 minutes or so until they broke out of the storm near Oklahoma. Yup, that's how long it lasted. After the ordeal, somewhere over Missouri, I struck up a conversation with one of the flight attendants. She told me that was the worst turbulence she had ever experienced. She was somewhere in her 40s, so I figured it must have been pretty unusual. I received a letter from American Airlines roughly 2 weeks later. It was clearly edited by various attorneys, but it was clearly meant to be an apology letter. I wish I had saved it. Lesson learned. Don't fly out of Dallas in the spring or summer on American Airlines. Don't. Maybe things have changed now, but I still won't do it. Story 3. When my son was 18 months old, I fed him peanut butter and jelly for the first time for lunch, and my wife said he'd already had some at daycare. I laid him down for a nap a short time later like usual after lunch. About 45 minutes later, he woke up crying, and I could tell he was in pain. I rushed to the room to find him completely swollen. I instantly knew he was allergic to peanuts. I did a 10-minute drive to the hospital in less than 5 minutes. The whole time I was thinking his throat would close, and I would have to watch my baby boy die in the back seat. I got him there, and everything ended up being fine as they treated him instantly. Thankfully, his reaction to peanuts so far has only ever been a surface reaction and not throat closing. He's 11 now, and to this day, I've never experienced anything more scary. Story 4. The look on my obgin's face when she said, "I think we need to do a C-section." Now I got tunnel vision at that moment and couldn't see anyone else in the room. At every single prenatal visit, she had always been the most genuinely upbeat person I've ever met. Even smiling and sweet when I saw her at 6 a.m. one morning in the hospital after I'd heard her coaching a delivery in the next room at 3 a.m. the night before. In that moment, she looked so incredibly serious it made me feel sick. I'd already been hearing my son's heart rate falling with every contraction for the past hour, and I was so terrified that I had come all this way and would never actually get to see my little boy. It turned out he had the umbilical cord wrapped both around his neck and around his rib cage like a toga. I held my breath until he cried and didn't offer to let a single person who came to visit me hold him the entire stay at the hospital. I just had to keep reminding myself that he was safe now and perfectly healthy, because those last 15 minutes of pregnancy were terrifying. Story 5. I was a trucker back in 2012. I was driving along the interstate one night when I saw what appeared to be a large black dog jump out from the right shoulder into my lane, where I slammed into it. The truck seemed to shudder quite horribly. The two fridges, my microwave, my printer, and most of my clothes all came crashing down off my top bunk. I saw the front hood literally pop up, blocking my view for an instant before slamming back down. Keep in mind these hoods are hinged at the front and tilt forward to open, but I saw it appear to tilt back, like a normal car would, meaning the hood was ripped from its hinges. I was fully loaded at almost 80,000 pounds with 4 massive paper rolls, and the impact slowed me down from 55 miles per hour to about 30, and the engine was chugging, still in 10th gear. Instantly, I figured I must have hit a bear. To my surprise, the headlights were still working, and a quick check of my gauges showed everything was still functioning, at least for now, and the truck was still driving normally. I wasn't about to stop in case there were more bears around. Even if a tire started going flat, you'd be surprised how far you can drive on a flat in a truck. So I flicked my hazards on and warned everyone on the CB that I just hit a literal bear. Bear is CB slang for police, so I had to specify a literal bear. I got to a truck stop about 5 miles later, eyes glued to the temperature gauge the whole time, expecting to run out of coolant at any moment and start overheating. I pulled in, got out to check the damage, and to my absolute horror, my truck was in absolutely perfect condition. There wasn't a scratch on it. The fiberglass front end was perfect. No sign of any impact. I opened the hood, perfect. Hinge was perfect. Radiator and intercooler, perfect. All the stuff that had fallen off my top bunk was all over the cab floor, so I knew the impact happened. I almost lost it with fear upon seeing that. That strange sinking feeling you get when the roller coaster gets to the top and you're looking straight down. It was like that, but times 100. I hauled out of there for the rest of the night until I got out of state. I went an hour or so over my legal time. Later, I found out about an old trucker legend of the black dog. They say the black dog will jump in front of you, causing truckers to crash trying to avoid it. Good thing in trucking school we are taught to never swerve or brake hard to avoid a crash, as ramming something is a lot safer than flipping your 80,000-pound truck on top of a car. The even stranger thing, the next morning I checked my load. The paper rolls had not shifted. When they load these types of rolls, they generally put 2 almost all the way down the trailer toward the front, about 6 feet or so from the front wall. Then they put 2 closer to the rear of the trailer to balance the weight and prevent the trailer from breaking in half from having all the weight right in the middle. But even stopping a little hard, like when someone cuts you off, is enough to get them to slide forward and bear down all their weight on the rear truck tires, to the point they look flat. Yet they had not moved an inch. Literally impossible. I got a call the next morning asking if I was in an accident last night, as the truck's onboard accelerometer recorded a significant impact in deceleration from 55 miles per hour to 30 miles per hour in less than a second. But they thought it was a glitch since the radar didn't detect anything or apply the brakes. Trucks have radar to detect slow cars and will slam on your brakes automatically to avoid a crash. I explained the whole situation, texted them pics of my trashed cab, but not a scratch on the truck itself, and the load being exactly where it was initially loaded. They had me stop at a nearby shop to do an inspection to make sure nothing on the truck was damaged, and it all came back perfect. I will never know what the hell happened that night. Story 6, kinda long, I'll try to shorten it. Was moving out of my old house into a new one about 20 minutes away on the highway. We were having our first real bad snowstorm of the year. Keep in mind we're in a cargo van U-Haul, so we avoided the highways and took the back road instead. We were about halfway there when we came off a stop sign, and I saw headlights slowly coming into our lane. I yelled something to my fiancée, who was driving at the time, but it was too late, and she hit us head on. I got out to check our damage, but realized she was in the snowbank still flooring it. I sprinted to the window to see a lady with her head slumped back. I started banging on the window and yelling, but there was no response or movement at all. I was yelling for people to call the police, which of course no one did, so I stepped back and called. While I was trying to get my words out to dispatch, a guy pulled up behind me and I told him to try to kick the window out. He tried but couldn't, So he ran back to his car and grabbed a tire iron and busted her back window out, and we finally got her car off. I felt for a pulse. Nothing. Waited for police to show up and told them what happened. And while I was standing there, they found a pipe on the driver's side floorboard and said it was a potential overdose. They hit her with 2 shots of Narcan and put her in the ambulance. In the moment, I thought she died on impact because of the accident, when instead, she was already gone when she hit us. I don't know if she made it. This was back in February. Story 7. Witnessed a plane crash that killed all 4 people on board after I had fueled their plane, met them, and helped them with getting bags on it. I remember watching it take off, then seeing something fall off of it. I called the control tower to tell them to tell the pilot something came off his plane, thinking maybe he left something on the wing or something. Then mid-conversation, the controller said, "Gotta go. He's got smoke in the cockpit." Click. Watched the plane turn around to try to get back to the airport. I thought he was going to make it, but he never turned toward the runway after going by, as smoke was trailing behind him, and he disappeared behind the tree line. I thought maybe he was going for a field or something and would be all right. Then came the biggest explosion I've ever seen in my life. I lost sleep for a few days because I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. I still remember it very vividly to this day, and how terrified I was, wondering if it was anything I did while fueling it, or something that caused it. Story 8. The Sydney siege was a big one for me. I didn't see it firsthand, but I went to school close to the city, and when the news broke, we obviously weren't allowed to leave to go home when school ended. Thing is, my aunt was the regional manager for all the Lint cafes in New South Wales, and my first thought was about whether she was okay. Luckily, she wasn't at the cafe at the time, but she didn't respond to any of our calls or texts all day, and we were worried sick about her. Turns out it was because the gunman was using the store manager's phone to communicate with her and negotiate with police. So the police had her phone the entire time. She was really close with the store manager who died and received a text from him with his last words before he was shot. We didn't see her or speak to her for months after the siege. I think she was in real shock. I cannot imagine how hard that would have been for her. Another scary thing, witnessing my grandmother have a panic attack on her deathbed. People know when they are going to die, and it is not pretty. She kept saying, "I don't want to go," over and over again. Story 9. My wife and I were driving down the interstate behind a truck that was pulling a trailer full of junk. An old wheel and tire came off, bounced a couple of times, and then shot off straight at us. There have been a lot of times in my life where everything slowed down. Every other time, I've been able to calmly collect my thoughts and do what I needed to do. I'm a nurse, and people's lives have been saved by my ability to do that. This was the only time where I just couldn't think of a single thing to do and started to mentally prepare that this tire hitting me in the face was what was going to end my life. I turned the wheel a little bit so that I would take the brunt of the hit and not my wife. Then I just waited and hoped the wreck wouldn't kill her too. It hit with one of the loudest noises I've ever heard as it smashed our windshield. Thankfully, it also crushed the metal roof, which absorbed a good amount of the hit and prevented the wheel from going all the way through the glass. We got cut up some, but we lived. Whoever was driving the truck drove off and left us there and was never found. Story 10. I was at the mall with my mom and 3 little brothers when I was about 14. My oldest brother was 12 and suddenly said he didn't feel well. We decided to go home. He told my mom he couldn't see, and she looked worried and started supporting him. Then he swung to the right, hit the wall, and fainted. I was really mean to my brother when we were kids, and I immediately started panicking, thinking he was dying and that I was always so bratty to him, and now we'd never make up with each other. He was only passed out for a few seconds and was just sick with some kind of bug that had him asleep and watching Lord of the Rings for the next day and a half, but it was definitely a signal to me to love my brothers more. Story 11. My then fiancé passed out on the treadmill when we were at the gym. He was incredibly healthy. There was no reason he should faint, but he stopped the belt and kind of wobbled. I have a lot of responder training, so I got behind him and put my arms under his when he failed to answer me, and when he collapsed, I was able to get him prone without injury and ordered someone to call 911. He woke up pretty soon after. He was fine. I broke down in a full panic attack 4 hours later, safely at home. It was fine. After seeing a doctor, it turns out he has an issue that causes his blood pressure to spike and cause fainting. He's better at managing it now. I have been in a lot of crisis situations and respond instinctively, but this was the first where it was someone I loved. Apparently, I'm just wired to handle things in the moment and break down later. Story 12. My award goes to my friend collapsing and me having to give him CPR and seeing him unresponsive on the floor and potentially dead. He lived. That was the most traumatic thing, but that is boring. I want to talk about caterpillars. Ever since I was little, I've collected caterpillars, watched them turn into chrysalises and beautiful butterflies, and let them go. Great. Cool. When I was a mid-teen, I had some green caterpillars, and I noticed they were acting a little off, which is normal before they start to turn. Then, a little while later, little yellow maggot-looking things started coming out of my caterpillars. Maybe a dozen or more out of each one. It was one of the most horrifying and disturbing things to see, even for an adult, let alone a kid with a cute hobby. It was apparently a type of parasitic wasp that lays eggs inside the caterpillar, and then they mature, burst out, and wriggle out of the skin. The caterpillar survives the trauma and guards the larvae while they spin their own cocoons, and then it starves to death. Story 13. I witnessed an attempted murder 2 months ago at work. I was walking down the lobby of my former hotel when I heard horrible screaming. A man came out from the hallway to my left dragging a woman by her hair. She was covered in blood. He stopped in front of me and started beating her again with a box cutter. I ran back to my office to grab my phone and call 911. By the time I got back to the scene, others had come out and subdued him. The woman lived, though she had a stroke and lost an eye. The box cutter blade had been broken off in her head too. The man died at the scene due to injuries while being subdued. I quit about a month later. Story 14. I was hiking with a friend, my 10-year-old son, and my 5-year-old daughter. We had just climbed a pretty steep part of the hill, and the trail got narrower and a bit steeper. My friend told us to watch the edge. It's super steep, and we had just reached the treetops. A moment later, my son decided to take a picture, and my daughter flipped around to pose. She slipped over the side of the cliff in an instant. She made no sound, but I screamed at the top of my lungs. It seemed like forever before I got to the edge. Because miracles do actually happen, my daughter was standing on a small ledge just under the one she had fallen from. She held still and raised her arms, and I was able to pull her back up. She was completely unconcerned that she almost died. I was woozy and sick from fear and had to rest. We cut the hike short as well. Story 15. My ex battled depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts as a result of her childhood with an abusive father. It was absolutely terrifying the first time I saw her have a panic attack. I had nightmares about them, where I would see her crying. I'd go up to her to try to comfort her. She would just stare at me for a moment with those cold, empty eyes. 1,000-yard stare so deep she didn't seem to have any awareness of reality. Then suddenly she'd recognize me, and the emptiness in her eyes would be replaced with the most intense fear you'll ever see. I had that dream several times while we were dating, and it never got any less scary, seeing myself cause a panic attack, or at least make it worse, when I just wanted to comfort her. Getting out of my own head, they were also terrifying in real life, most notably when I'd see new scars on her arms where she'd hurt herself. One day she handed me something from her closed fist and told me she needed me to have it. When she pulled her hand away from mine, a razor blade was revealed, and that's when I noticed more fresh marks on her wrists. There were days I would drive her home from school, and she would tell me about her recent suicidal thoughts. I would try to be strong for her, but after dropping her off, I'd drive just around the corner so she couldn't see me sitting there. Then I'd pull over and just cry. Once I got home, I'd cry myself to sleep. It was incredibly difficult. I felt like I had absolutely no idea how to help her. We had a lot of good times together too, and I don't for a second regret the relationship, but parts of that relationship were the most difficult thing I've ever gone through. Story 16. My mom was in an ICU bed, fresh out of a 10-hour-long open heart surgery. She had asked me to visit and speak to her because she was afraid and anxious the night before. I was dreading that entire day until I inevitably got the call that the surgery was done, and I could see her. It was a 30-minute drive to the hospital, trying to hype myself up while calling family to update them. I picked up some flowers and a card. I got to the hospital and got directions to my mom's room. The closer I got, the more my world started falling apart. I reached the curtain and my heart was beating like crazy, knowing that once I moved it, I might not be ready for what I'd see. I pulled it aside and saw my mom. Her eyes were rolled back with a tube down her throat, her tongue hanging out, and she was hooked to a ton of machines that manually pumped her heart and lungs. It made her look like she was convulsing. And of course, there was a huge incision on her chest. I just bawled my eyes out and held her hand for as long as they allowed me to be there. My mom doesn't remember anything. I kind of wish I hadn't seen her like that now because it hit me so hard. And now that she's better, I get a little upset when I see she's doing something unhealthy or not taking care of herself, because I can't handle seeing her like that again. She looked like my uncle did when he was on his deathbed. Story 17. I was 15 when my appendix got inflamed. Nothing abnormal, I just needed a minor surgery to get it removed before it burst. Appendix removal surgeries are 99% successful, I heard before, so there were absolutely no worries from me or my parents. I went into surgery and apparently one of the trainee doctors accidentally sliced one of my blood vessels inside my intestines, but didn't notice. I was stitched up and considered fine. Obviously, I was out cold for this, but while recovering, my entire stomach pooled with blood. My whole body shriveled up, and almost every ounce of blood was just sitting in my stomach. The nurse who was watching me tried to call doctors, but none of them were bothered to come since it was around 2 a.m. at this point. But the nurse insisted and pushed and kept going at the doctors to come. Eventually, I was checked out. They saw me white as a ghost with my stomach the size of a pregnant woman's. The entire hospital went into a frenzy, with every surgeon and doctor coming to operate on me to find the bleeding. They had to remove all my internal organs just to find the little cut in the vessels. They said I lost 80% of my blood. I needed 9 transfusions, 2 minutes away from bleeding out. I went into surgery thinking it was a simple procedure and that I would wake up fine the next morning, but I didn't end up waking up until 3 days later, completely immobile, with a massive scar up my stomach and chest. I can't imagine what my parents had to go through. They made them sit in the hospital chapel while they took me down for the life-saving surgery. They had to change their entire policy on how to do surgeries now because of what happened. It's scary to think about how close I was to dying, but it taught me to appreciate life more. Now I'm 18 and going strong. Story 18. I was riding home from a friend's house late on a Friday night with my brother driving. The road we were on had 3 lanes across and ran for about 15 miles through town. For several miles, there was a guy on a crotch rocket in the lane to our right, and I had been watching him as I stared blankly out the window. I remember noticing he wasn't wearing a helmet, not required in Florida, and thinking, that's not very safe. Within maybe 2 minutes of that thought, as we approached an overpass, an SUV ran a red turn light in front of us, and the motorcyclist smacked into the side of it. I saw the whole thing and yelled at my brother to turn around as I called 911. By the time we made it back to him, I had 911 on the phone, and a few other people had pulled over as well. All my first aid training kicked in, and I found myself taking charge. He was conscious but very confused. He had blood coming out of his nose, and I assumed he would have head or neck damage. So, talking with the operator, we made sure he stayed on the ground and didn't move his neck. He was scraped up but had no other obvious injuries. I asked him his name and explained that he had been in an accident and help was on the way. The car he hit took off. I still can't remember what kind of car it was or what color. I had to give a statement to the police since it was a hit and run. I've never experienced that kind of adrenaline. It could have been so much worse. Story 19. When I was 5, I watched my mom have a brain aneurysm in front of my sister and me. We were sorting her Girl Scout cookies in mid-sentence. My mom's eyes rolled into the back of her head, and she just ceased to exist for a few minutes. I had just learned in kindergarten what to do in an emergency and went to call 911. But my older 7 or 8-year-old sister had a serious panic meltdown and took the phone and wouldn't let me call, screaming, "She's just sleeping." I think she thought calling 911 would make it real or something. You can't blame a child for how they react in a traumatic incident. Fortunately, she woke up a while later, called my dad, and he called 911. She had surgery the next day and was in the hospital for months. I had my 6th birthday in her hospital room with her on ventilators and all sorts of life support. The image of birthday balloons and ICU machines is forever burned into my brain, and my birthday makes me incredibly uncomfortable. They tried to make it up to me the following year by taking me to a water park, but it got snowed out. So now I just go out of my way to hide my birthday from people to avoid disappointment and not think too hard about it. But the odds of surviving both a brain aneurysm and the surgery to correct it are so small that I am extremely fortunate she is alive today, 20 years later. That was my first lucid memory, and it's definitely shaped both my sister and me in significant ways. She's a doctor now, and I can't help but credit that moment as the reason she went down that path. Story 20. It happened the year after my girlfriend and I started dating. It was Christmas Eve, and I was at my aunt's house celebrating, texting my girlfriend as usual. It was getting really late, and she was telling me how tired she was. So when she stopped texting, I just assumed she had fallen asleep, and I proceeded to drive home for Christmas Day. The next morning I hadn't heard from her, which wasn't unusual, except for the fact that her aunt had texted me asking if I knew where she was. I told her that she was home the last time I heard from her. Now it's about 11 a.m., and we had finished opening our gifts, so I decided to drive to my girlfriend's house to give her her present. Much to my surprise, as I pulled around the corner, I saw a smoking pile of ash where her house was supposed to be. It took me a second to process it, then my blood ran cold. I drove home and told my parents what I had seen, trying my best not to just break down. It wouldn't be until about 3 hours later that she came to my door, telling me there had been a fire in the middle of the night. She barely woke up in time to get out, and had been staying in a motel in the next town over since it happened. Everyone got out safely, except her cat, who didn't make it. Fast forward about 4 years later, and we still drive by the lot where her house used to be, and we both get shudders. Story 21. When I was around 16 or 17, I was driving down a gravel road during the winter. The vehicle in front of me was traveling extremely slow, and I remember being a bit frustrated because it was slower than you'd need to go to still be safe, like 5 to 10 miles per hour. This gravel road is about 5 miles long, so the frustration was paired with my curfew, since I was likely going to be grounded for getting home 40 minutes late. This road has quite a few hills on it, and for the first 4.5 miles, this lady was being absolutely as safe as can be. But as we approached the last hill, she suddenly increased her speed to about 40 miles per hour. And I just thought, oh no, because on the other side of the next downhill, there's a T intersection, and she was going way too fast to make the turn. On the other side of the T is a steep embankment about 20 feet high, covered in trees. I knew this lady was going to crash. Luckily, this was a time when I had a cell phone to call for help. I didn't see the car go over the embankment because I was on the other side of the hill, still driving cautiously on the slick road. But as I came over the top, my assumption was confirmed. All I could see was a red glow from the taillights and smoke or steam rising. I slowed my car to a stop in the safest position I could and called 911. It would be 15 minutes at best before anyone could respond that far out. Then I scrambled my way down to her car through the snow, wearing gym shorts, a t-shirt, and tennis shoes. I finally made it to her car after tearing my way through a tangle of tree branches surrounding the vehicle and found this lady bleeding from her head but still conscious. I told her not to worry and that I had called for help. She quickly responded with something along the lines of, "No, don't call the police. Just help me push my car out." That's when I realized she was probably intoxicated. The odor inside the car helped confirm that. I continued to wait with her, but she kept insisting that I just help her get the car out. I felt like I was doing more harm than good being next to her, so I told her to hang tight while I went to check the road and move my car. Eventually, emergency services arrived and took over. I had to stick around to give my statement. When I got back to my car, I found my battery was dead from leaving my lights on the whole time. Luckily, I was able to get a jump from a farmer who brought his tractor over to pull the car out. I never found out if the lady ended up okay or who she even was. But I do know my mom was slightly upset at me and my phony excuse for being late. Story 22. A girl crossing the road got hit by a car. I was getting irritated at traffic, but I saw something weird, so I smartly stuck my head and body out of the car, Ace Ventura style, to see what was happening, and this girl just got smacked by a car. She fell and her teeth flew out. She was not okay mentally and probably had a concussion. She begged not to be taken to the hospital because she couldn't afford the ambulance ride. America, right? But a nurse on the scene convinced her. Afterward, everyone just left, and her boyfriend was across the street at the auto store. He was in shock, and I talked to him while he had a panic attack. Nobody seemed to care about his distress, so I just tried to help him calm down. I felt awful for the girl. The other stuff I didn't see firsthand, thanks to a 20-second delay in my commute, but the aftermath was horrible. Please wear a helmet if you ride a motorcycle. Seeing two bodies sprawled out on the road, with cuts on their heads and blood pooling from their ears, was horrifying. Probably 50 cars had stopped, and it was surreal seeing nurses in scrubs jumping from their cars to help these men before the ambulance and police arrived. Someone even directed traffic. But most of all, it was surreal to see all the leather, muscle, and tough guy energy lying motionless, not breathing. And in our area, everyone had "watch for motorcycles" bumper stickers and yard signs. It was truly a freak accident. Story 23. I haven't seen many scary things, but here's a memory I'll never forget. I was in 11th grade, had just gotten my driver's license and a new car. On a Friday night, I met some of my track teammates at a local high school football game. The game hadn't started yet, so we all, 6 people total, decided to get in my car and go get ice cream. It was getting dark, and the ice cream place was several miles down a narrow 2-lane road. At some point, a driver coming from the opposite direction pulled into my lane to pass illegally. We were both going about 55 miles per hour. I can't explain how quickly it happened. I saw the headlights coming at me and swerved into the grass just in time. Everyone in the car was screaming. We were so close to being hit and possibly killed. I never told my parents, since it was illegal in my state for minors to drive more than one passenger at a time, and they would have been angry. Story 24. What I'm about to write I've never gone into detail about, but it goes with the scariest thing I've ever seen. I was sitting on a school bus on the way home from school in 7th or 8th grade. We turned out of the school and headed down Carling Street. About 25 minutes later, we turned down the road that led to my stop. Before the bus even stopped, the kid sitting behind me pulled out a plastic bag and placed it over my head. All I remember is not being able to breathe and then using my fingers to rip open the bag. In that moment, I looked around at those I considered friends and saw them laughing. Young teens, 14 to 16 years old, laughing at what could have been someone's final moments. I saw the effects of growing up in poverty, surrounded by gangs and violence. The belief that empathy and compassion made you weak, and people's inability to react or help when someone is in danger. That was the scariest thing I've ever seen. Because of that and other traumatic experiences, I suffered from PTSD for over 10 years and self-medicated with alcohol, marijuana, and cigarettes. I'm clean now, and thanks to therapy, I've been able to forgive those people for their inaction, and even forgive the kid who did it. Story 25. I've been a nurse for 7 years, and the scariest thing I've ever seen is COVID-19 pneumonia. People go from being mobile, independent humans to confused, panicked, and isolated while they pass away. I can't tell you how many video calls I've had to set up for families to say goodbye. I've had people beg me not to let them die. I've had families sob over the phone, just wanting to see their loved ones one more time. I've had patients, through tears, tell me they just want to go home. But I can't give that to them. Nothing I do seems to help. They either fight it off or they don't. I offer them my gloved hands. I read them texts and show them pictures while they're lying on their stomachs for days on BiPAP at max oxygen, because letting them lie on their backs would kill them. One day I was walking through the COVID unit hallway, and all I could hear were BiPAPs forcing air into broken lungs and someone feebly whispering, "Help me, help me." And I thought, this is hell. I'm in hell. I almost had a panic attack. I've never had one in my life. I've never even been diagnosed with anxiety or any mental health issues. Until COVID. There's a whole generation of healthcare workers coming out of this pandemic with CPTSD, and mental health services in America. Don't make me laugh. We never even got hazard pay. I constantly have nightmares about work. I can't visit vaccinated friends indoors without a mask because of how much anxiety I have related to COVID. I sleep less, my appetite is gone, and I experience waves of depression that I never had before. But it all comes down to the same thing. I did everything I could, and they still died. Story 26. When our neighbor's house caught fire, my dad was in his room, and my brother and I were in the living room watching TV. We heard a knock at the door, and I got up to see who it was. It was the neighbor's daughters, all 3 of them. The middle one, probably the oldest of the 3, told me to get my dad quickly because their house was on fire Their mom wasn't home, and they didn't have a phone. I was confused because I looked out the door toward their house and didn't see anything, but I told them I would and ran to get my dad. My dad was asleep and confused when I tried to tell him what was going on. I panicked and went to fill up a bucket of water while my brother was getting up and following me out. I ran out with my bucket of water and saw that the front of their house looked totally fine. I got confused until all the girls started yelling at me that the fire was in the back. I ran around and, oh no, the entire back of the house was on fire. My bucket of water wasn't going to do anything. I freaked out, threw the water at literally nothing, and ran back to get my dad. He had already called 911, and I asked everyone if anyone was still inside the house. They said just their puppy. They had left the puppy behind. By that time, the fire was already spreading to the front of the house. One of the scariest nights of my life. If it had been windy that day, our house would have caught fire too. The window in my room shattered and our fence caught fire. Story 27. I was about 15 years old going for a walk to the river. On my way back home, a guy pulled over and asked if I was lost. I said no, that I lived nearby. He asked if I needed a ride home. I said no, I wanted to walk. He asked again if I was lost and needed a ride. That's when I knew something was wrong and repeated that I didn't want to ride. His face completely changed, and I was terrified. I looked up and down the road thinking about where I could run. No houses were close enough. I would have to run into the woods and swim across the river. In that moment, as we stared each other down, I saw a car coming down the road. I was about to wave and scream when he looked in the same direction, saw the car, and then looked at me with the most hateful expression I've ever seen. Then he sped off. I just stood there for a few moments trying to process what had just happened. It was a light-colored sedan, and he was a normal-looking middle-aged guy with thinning blonde hair and blue eyes. I'd probably never recognize him. He looked so ordinary. I quickly went home and never walked to the river again. I used to go there often after my brother passed away because it was our fishing spot. I'll never forget those eyes. Even now, a decade later, my heart is pounding and my hands are sweating just thinking about it. Story 28. I watched a guy get stabbed to death at a party for trying to stop a fight. Some guy had been belligerent from the start of the night and eventually decided to pick a fight with a shy, polite kid who clearly wanted nothing to do with it. A guy I had just met that night, a really tall, muscular guy who was incredibly nice despite looking intimidating, saw what was happening, picked the aggressive guy up, threw him onto the grass and told him to stop or go home. After staring him down for a moment, the tall guy turned and walked away. Then the aggressive guy pulled a knife out of his pocket, ran up behind him, and stabbed him between the ribs before taking off. He was rushed to the hospital by car but died on the way. His lung had been punctured, and the nearest hospital was 30 minutes away. I watched the entire thing happen in disbelief. The guy who did it had tried to pick a fight with me about an hour earlier by stealing what he thought was my cigar and pack of cigarettes and challenging me to take them back. I told him I didn't care what he did. I was busy talking to a girl I had just met, and then 20 minutes later, he stabbed someone. It wasn't just scary because I saw a kind, undeserving man die while defending someone. It was scary because it could have been me if I had reacted differently. Story 29. One time when I was working as a semi-truck tire tech, I saw a coworker get his legs pinned under the tires of a flat-deck semi-trailer because a jack stand failed while he was putting the tire back on. For those who don't know, semi-truck tires are installed by sitting on the ground with your legs on either side of the tire and using your legs to lift it a few inches to get it onto the studs, so you don't ruin your back. The crazy part is, the guy ended up being okay. He wasn't a normal-sized guy. He was huge, about 7'2", and proportionally bigger in every way, including his bones. He had probably several thousand pounds on his legs, but they didn't break, just badly bruised. We got a jack, lifted the trailer off him, and he was able to get out on his own. He was in pain and shaken up badly, but he was able to stand. It took a few days to heal, and he was back to work after that. If it had been anyone else, their legs would have been crushed. It was terrifying when it first happened, and I heard him scream. I've never felt adrenaline like that before. Story 30. Someone being kicked to death in front of me. I came to the UK initially as an undocumented immigrant, and we were essentially sold to a criminal gang that used us as forced labor and sent us to various local farms. One supplied flowers to a major supermarket. I still get cold shivers when I walk past the flower aisle. To keep us compliant, the gang took all our passports and threatened us daily with beatings, assault, and being reported to immigration services and deported. This was just part of daily life. One day, one of the guys who lived in the same house as me couldn't take it anymore. He was exhausted, fed up with being humiliated and living in fear, and he refused to listen or go to work. The situation escalated. He kept refusing, and in the end, a group of enforcers from the gang decided to make an example out of him. They beat him relentlessly in front of us for hours. In the end, they carried him out wrapped in a blanket. It was clear he wasn't breathing at that point. To this day, I don't know if his family ever found out what happened to him. It haunts my dreams. I didn't know his full name or where he was from, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it now. At the time, I just stood there paralyzed with fear, saying nothing, afraid that I could be next. It's something I'll never forget. Story 31. When I was in third grade, my sister and I would always walk to the bus stop together. One day she got sick, and I was forced to walk to the bus stop alone at about 6:30 a.m. It was still dim out, with the sun just starting to rise. So I left the house and walked toward the bus stop. I got there and sat down to wait for the bus. Then I noticed something way down at the end of the block. I stood up and squinted to see better. What I saw was an all-white figure, far down the street, just dancing. Not like choreographed dancing, more like random, erratic movements. It terrified me. I stood there frozen in shock. 2 minutes passed, and I was still watching. Then it suddenly stopped, like it noticed me. It stared at me for a full minute, then stepped behind a street pole and vanished. I thought, there's no way a human can hide completely behind a street pole. Then suddenly its head peeked out from behind the pole and stared at me again. I didn't know what to do. I was still frozen, nearly in tears. And then just in time, the bus arrived, and the figure was gone. To this day, I don't know what that thing was, but I know it was looking straight at me. Story 32. The first thing that comes to mind is the time my sister slipped off a moving truck and hit the ground hard. Between the height, the loud sound of her hitting the bumper, and the fact that she landed right over the trailer hitch, I genuinely thought I had just watched her get paralyzed, or worse. I ran over to her, and when she got up, I couldn't believe it. Apparently, that's the day she knew I really loved her, because she said she'd never heard so much fear in my voice. It was all over in 10 seconds, but I was so scared in that moment. The second thing that comes to mind was the first week of the pandemic lockdown in NYC. Unsettling doesn't even begin to describe what it felt like. Everything was empty. Stores were shuttered. Streets were ghost towns. And aside from the sirens, which didn't stop for months, it was eerily quiet. There was nothing to do but stay in your apartment, watch the daily briefings, see the numbers go up, and hope to God you had stopped going out early enough to avoid getting sick. Those 2 weeks of just waiting to see if you developed symptoms were a nightmare. The morgue trucks were also horrible, though thankfully I only saw them in passing once or twice and never open. Still, the whole atmosphere felt surreal and terrifying. Story 33. I saw a man covered head to toe in blood, like Carrie in her dress, no joke, being carried by his brother in the subway late one night, after hours. They looked to be in their 20s. The man who was covered in blood looked almost lifeless, just dripping red all over. His brother was shouting, "Someone help me! They stabbed my brother! Please help!" I was with my own brother, which made the moment even more eerie. There were maybe 5 people on the platform, and we were walking toward them to help. But somehow it was like fate stepped in, because as we got closer, a couple of police officers happened to show up and rushed over. One officer stayed with the brothers, radioing for medical help, while the other ran off in the direction of the suspects. The conscious brother told them it had happened in a nearby tunnel ramp. I'd never seen anything like that before. I don't know what happened to them. I hope the man survived. I never saw any news stories about it. The image of his bloodied body and his screaming, frantic brother still haunts me. Story 34. My mom died suddenly right before she and my dad were going to bed. I was out with my girlfriend at the time. I was on my way home when he called me, telling me to come quickly. Something was wrong with my mom. I was about halfway there when he called again and told me to go straight to the hospital instead. When I got there, they were working on her. I was only there for a few minutes before the doctors came out and told my dad and me that she was gone. They said her heart stopped while she was in bed and that she died instantly. The scariest part was when they brought us back into the hospital room to see her body. Her eyes were open. She had false teeth due to poor health care during childhood, and her teeth were askew in her mouth. It turned the beautiful image I had of my mother into a horrifying and grim memory. I'll never forget that image, and I'm grateful that my brother and sister weren't there to see her like that. Story 35. My older brother has struggled with serious addiction, and one time he snapped in full tweaker mode. He started hitting me, then turned on our mom, all while his children, my sister, and her best friend were in the living room watching. My mother tried to stop him, but he threw her off like she was nothing. Then he started hitting her too. I ran to my room, grabbed my 8mm Mauser rifle, loaded one bullet, and came back into the living room, pointing it at my brother. He turned his attention to me. I told him to leave. He stepped forward until his chest was pressed against the barrel and said I was too scared to pull the trigger. I flipped the safety off and asked, "Do you want to bet?" He walked out and I locked the door behind him. A few moments later, he came back pounding on the door, demanding to see his kids. I told him if he went back to his Jeep, I'd send them out. After some arguing, he agreed and I sent them. Years later, probably a decade after that incident, I saw him again. The first thing he said to me was, "It's a good thing you locked the door that day because I went to my Jeep, grabbed my gun, and I was coming back to kill all of you." Here's the truth. My brother is a sociopath, and you don't know fear until you grow up with an older sibling who is one. I still have a scar on my forehead from a point-blank BB gunshot fired by him when we were younger. Story 36. I was admitted to the hospital with pneumonia during the H1N1 outbreak a few years back. The nurses on duty told me I had a twin, a girl my age who had been admitted at the same time, with the same underlying condition, mild asthma. She was otherwise active and healthy, just like me. We were rooting for each other through the nurses. Later in the evening, things took a turn for the worse. We were both wheeled down to the ICU when our O2 levels dropped into the mid-80% range. As I watched my own levels slowly fall, I heard a commotion in her bay and the sound of agonized breathing. I could only see a swarm of doctors and nurses around her. Within minutes, she passed away from acute respiratory distress. One by one, the team stepped out, defeated and visibly exhausted. Not long after, I had a team around my bed discussing whether or not to intubate me as my oxygen levels hit the high 70s. My wife got the call I had been dreading. "Be ready, keep your phone on. The next few hours are critical." I spent the night sending texts, trying to reassure her while frantically compiling login details for accounts, password managers, and anything she might need. It wasn't exactly a peaceful Friday evening. 2 people went in, 1 walked out, 3 weeks later. I think about that girl all the time. Story 37. I once saw a glowing shape in the sky while in the New Mexico desert. I also worked as a projectionist at a cinema one summer, and Kung Fu Panda was the first digital film we had. The rest required manually threading the reels into the machines. One night, while checking on the audio for Kung Fu Panda, I heard a deep, exhausted exhale in my left ear. It sounded like it came from just a foot away. I didn't turn my head. I tried to glance with my peripheral vision. I saw what I thought was a dark brown silhouette, but when I turned my head, there was nothing there. I left the lights on for the rest of the shift on that side of the theater, upstairs in the projection box. Before that happened, we were cleaning all the films after midnight, which is something you do every few months so dust and hair don't show up during projection. The manager, another projectionist, and I were using a cleaning machine that plays the film while cleaning it. That night, we all heard a distinct shushing sound coming from one side of the dark projectionist box we were in. We also heard a baby crying. The manager checked all the theaters and confirmed there were no children present. He also told us it wasn't his first time hearing those exact sounds. All 3 of us heard them. That place gave us all chills for a long time after that. Story 38. In 1976, I was 10 years old and living in New York City. We lived in a 15-floor apartment building that had a small concrete playground behind it. One afternoon, while a group of my friends and I were playing outside, we heard a blood-curdling scream from above. We looked up just in time to see a woman fall from the roof of our building. She landed about 10 feet from where we were standing. Seeing a person fall from a building is not like what you see in movies. There's no graceful fall or perfectly still body with a small pool of blood. The body bounced, and her head— I won't describe it in detail, but all of us were covered in blood spatter. It was, without question, the most horrifying thing I've ever witnessed, and I'm an ER nurse who has seen more than most. It turned out the woman had been attacked somewhere in our building, likely in the laundry room, brought to the rooftop, assaulted, and then thrown off. Her attacker was never caught. She was only 22 years old. I remember her name was either Laura or Lori. It's been 45 years, and if I close my eyes, I can still see her face right before she landed. That image has haunted me for 4 decades. Story 39. I watched my 9-year-old daughter nearly die while we were on holiday in France. She had appendicitis that turned into peritonitis. The first doctor we took her to said it was a urinary infection, gave her antibiotics, and told us to bring her back in 3 days if she was still unwell. Within 12 hours, she was barely hanging on. We decided to ignore the doctor and took her to a hospital about an hour away. They took one look at her and sent us to another hospital an hour further. By the time we arrived, she was extremely ill, vomiting green slime and drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctors rushed her toward surgery, but there was a problem getting her into the operating room. I'll never forget the look on the surgeon's face as he screamed into the phone, trying to get her in. It was absolutely terrifying. My wife shut down emotionally. I'd never seen her like that. A nurse eventually suggested she take our other 2 children back to the campsite. Once our daughter was out of surgery, a nurse came to me and said, "Be strong. It's going to be a very long night. She might not make it." That moment and the following 48 hours were the scariest of my life. She survived. She spent a week in a French hospital before we could bring her home, followed by months of slow recovery. She's 18 now, healthy and loving life. And I just cried my eyes out writing this. Story 40. My parents built a small woodshed that sat about 30 feet from the corner of our house. During the cold winters, we'd use a wagon to bring wood from the shed to the wood rack on the back porch every few days. We burned a lot of wood to keep warm, had to buy it by the cords. I was probably 11 or 12 when this happened. One night, like usual, I went to fetch firewood. The lights in the shed hadn't been replaced, so I brought a weak battery lantern that barely worked. I stood in the door frame, which didn't even have a door, set the lantern down on the woodpile behind me, and started tossing wood into the wagon. The wood was stacked to the ceiling on each side of the door frame, with the back wall crammed with old tools, buckets, and hay. I had just thrown 1 or 2 pieces into the wagon when a shadow caught my eye. In the far left corner, the same side I was on, something shifted. As the lantern flickered slightly brighter, I saw what I can only describe as scared darkness with an inhuman shape. The only visible features were 2 wide, looming eyes. The thing seemed to vibrate, shivering without making a sound. I couldn't hear breathing. I couldn't hear anything. I could only stare. Unlike most spooky things, this didn't vanish. It was real. I felt it was real. Then its eyes tilted sideways, like a confused child's might. I ran. I nearly fell over the wagon and cleared the entire lawn in what felt like one step. I got to the back door, slammed it shut, and locked it. All I remember after that was my sister, who was the only one home with me, saying, "Dude, your eyes are like bowling balls. What's wrong?" Story 41. My dad and I used to ride motorcycles. One night in 2013, we were out having dinner with the family. My older cousin kept asking if I could give her a ride back to our house. She had never been on a motorcycle before. I had a spare helmet with me, so I agreed. Our parents' house was only a few miles away, so I didn't think much of it. After dinner, my cousin and I got on the bike, and I decided to take a slightly longer route. A few minutes into the ride, I noticed my dad following us on his motorcycle. He was wearing full protective gear, boots, jacket, gloves, but not a helmet. He sped up, passed between 2 cars, and went ahead of us at about 60 miles per hour. Then it happened. There was a median that turned into a left turn-only lane that he didn't see, probably because the sun had just set. I saw it all happen in slow motion. The back of his bike flew into the air, his hands went up, and then the motorcycle slammed down on top of him. His body rolled into the middle of the road, with cars swerving in every direction to avoid him. His bike came to a stop just before hitting him again. My cousin started panicking and almost caused us to lose balance. I passed my dad and pulled into a parking lot across the street. I told her to go find help and call 911 while I ran over to what I thought was my father's lifeless body, now surrounded by bystanders. To my shock, he was still breathing, shallow and fast. He was bleeding from a large wound on the back left side of his head and from several spots on his legs where his boots had torn. I grabbed his hand and applied pressure to his head, trying to comfort him. Thankfully, a fire station was nearby, and responders arrived quickly. They got him into an ambulance and rushed him to a trauma center. Amazingly, he recovered within a few weeks. He doesn't ride motorcycles anymore and struggles with short-term memory, but all things considered, he's lucky to be alive. Story 42. This is a toss-up between two things. I used to be an addict, mostly using H. A lot of my time was spent lying on a couch in drug houses, letting the world just slide away from me. One day I ended up being part of the aftermath of a murder, more like an execution, of a low-level dealer who had gone completely off the rails. He started selling to kids, some of whom died, which brought far too much heat and attention on everyone around him. I saw him answer the door, and then his head just exploded. The kitchen behind him was splattered with everything that had been his skull. A group of guys took his body out, and it was like he vanished from the world in the most brutal way imaginable. Not long after that, I started my path toward sobriety. The second event was about my friends. I had a group of ex-users, people who had sobered up, some together with me. But I've lost a lot of them over time. One buddy was found days later, decomposing in an alley. He lived far away, so I couldn't even attend the funeral. But the worst loss was another friend who kept relapsing. We tried everything to help him, and eventually found a compromise with weed. Better than the other things he used. One day he bought a cheap batch that was basically grass trimmings laced with something. Turned out to be a form of acid. He had never tried anything like that before. After a couple of days with no contact, we went to check on him. He had a severe allergic reaction and was in horrible shape. We rushed him to the hospital where he stayed for weeks, struggling. Only one of us was eventually allowed to see him. His family wanted nothing to do with him. They didn't even show up. He was fading. The damage was too much, and he didn't have the strength to keep fighting. I was the one who got to see him. His face was twisted in pain, and he whimpered like a hurt animal. The smell of sweat and fear coming off his body was overwhelming. He died that afternoon. Watching his struggle was horrifying. I was right there, so close to him, and completely helpless. It was like seeing a train barreling towards someone you love, and the only thing you can do is keep your eyes open and watch, or close them and pretend it's not happening. Story 43. I once saw a classmate nearly get impaled by a guardrail. We were crossing a zebra crossing that had metal guardrails on both sides. A car was approaching, and suddenly it sped up and veered to the right, directly toward us. I've read stories where people say time slowed down and their mind played out every scenario. That's exactly what happened to me. I considered whether I should run forward across the street, but I might not make it in time. I thought about going backward toward the wall, but the car could jump the curb and still hit me. Then I remembered watching a science show that talked about car collisions. The host said that if you're about to get hit, you should jump to avoid being thrown under the car. As I tensed up, I noticed my classmate was frozen in place, standing just behind the left guardrail. She wasn't moving. I pulled her away, positioning myself so I would take the hit instead. I jumped and landed on the car's hood. The only injury I had was a bruise on my backside from rolling off. When I looked back, the guardrail had bent into a 90-degree angle, stabbing into the wall exactly where she had been standing. She would have been pinned and impaled. I honestly think my backpack, full of textbooks, saved me from serious injury. It acted like a cushion and protected my back. I still think about how close that was and how different things could have ended. Story 44. I've got two stories. One was instantly terrifying, and the other was surreal at the time, but scary in retrospect. I was driving northbound on Interstate 5 just south of SeaTac, sometime in the late 2000s. The southbound lanes are slightly elevated compared to the northbound ones there. I was in the carpool lane. My boss was sitting next to me when a car suddenly came flying off the southbound lanes, soared over us, and crashed into the roadway behind us. We didn't stop. We were already far past the scene before it even registered what had happened. There were plenty of people stuck behind the accident already, so help was already present. I was tripping on adrenaline and shaking by the time I got my boss to the airport. It was obvious that we had just witnessed the start of a fatal accident and had missed being directly involved by less than a second. The surreal one happened in San Diego in 1990. I was driving westbound on El Cajon Boulevard between I-15 and I-805 with my friends Bob, Rob, and I can't remember the other guy, sometime around midnight.